Greetings and welcome. This is the pre-concert talk for the third program in the Victoria Symphony's virtual season. We're calling this one Autumn Reflections. I'm your host, Bob Fraser, the bass trombonist of the Victoria Symphony. Now this concert will be aired on Thursday, October the 29th at 7:30 p.m. and will remain online until November 27th. This is a first. We recorded this concert at Christ Church Cathedral. This is a perfect venue for both of the works on this program. It's the first program of the season to employ a few of our woodwind and brass players, and they're featured in a work by Vancouver-based composer Jordan Nobles. Now, I've put Jordan's website address on this photograph. He has an excellent website, which I highly recommend if you want to learn more about his work. The piece we're performing is a suite of three distinct movements called surface tension. It all has to do with water. Now, two things that you'll want to know about Jordan's work. The first is that he likes using really large spaces and having the performers both surround and in some cases intersperse with the audience. So if you're listening to this on a surround sound system, all the better. I'm hoping that presenting this to you in a video recording will give you opportunities to take in elements of this work you might miss in a live performance. Now, this work was premiered by the Victoria-based new music group, the Aventa Ensemble, under the direction of our own Bill Linwood, our orchestra's timpanist. And it was premiered at the Vancouver Aquatic Centre in 2012. Naturally, a piece about water, and the musicians all surrounded the pool when they performed it. You can actually see a video of this performance online if you look it up. Another feature of this piece is that it has a certain amount of what we call aleatory in it. And that means he gives a form to everyone, but each performer has some latitude as to how they execute the composition. So no two performances of this work will ever be identical. I'm going to show you what I mean here. Now, this is the score for the first movement of this piece entitled Quickening. Every musician has this exact same page, maybe in a different clef or a different transposition, depending on what instrument you play. But musicians are instructed to play off of each of these lines for about 20 seconds each. They can play the notes in any order they want, as long as they observe the dynamics, how loudly he wants them to play, and the other directions that Jordan gives them. Now you'll notice as we go down the page that each system has fewer and fewer notes and quieter peak dynamics in each line until we get to the very end of the movement and everyone all ends up on the same note. So the piece goes from fairly loud and chaotic and works its way to a very calm, serene ending. The other two movements employ a very similar technique. The performer gets to choose what they will play. So it requires a lot of careful listening from us as performers. You want what you're doing to complement the ensemble, so you try to play off your colleagues as much as possible. Now, I'm not in this piece, but I really enjoy works like this because they put you right in the midst of a very imaginative sound environment, which is quite different from the usual demarcation that we have between the performers and the audience. Now, the second work on this program is the Fifth Symphony of Franz Schubert. Now, I found this really cool digital image online of Schubert. It was created by an Iranian computer-generated artist, CGI artist. His name is Hadi Karimi, and it's based on known portraits of Schubert. This is our first opportunity this season to present something to you in a more typical classical orchestra format with strings and winds together. Now, the three most popular symphonies of Schubert in the repertoire are the Fifth, this one, the Eighth, which is the unfinished one, and the Ninth, which some musicians jokingly refer to as the unending symphony because it's got a very mammoth scale. It makes for a bit of an endurance test for everyone. Now, aside from these three symphonies and occasionally one of the larger mass settings he wrote, the orchestra doesn't actually play a lot of Schubert, but his influence is extremely important at the beginning of what we call the Romantic era in music history, the early 19th century. Schubert only lived to be 31 years old, but his output and his influence are phenomenal. He wrote an astonishing number of songs for solo voice and keyboard, almost 600 of them, and a number of very famous pieces of chamber music. If you know your chamber music, you'll think of pieces like the Death and the Maiden String Quartet and the Trout Quintet, both of which are actually based on his own songs. Now, the Fifth Symphony is a very early work. It was finished when Schubert was only 19 years old. You think back, what were you doing when you were 19? Now, those of you who are familiar with the talks I do live know that I talk a lot about what we call classical forms. That is, the forms used in a large percentage of the works we perform from the late 18th and early 19th century. So I'm talking the symphonies of Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, and all of their contemporaries like Schubert. These forms are all about balance. You have a theme presented here, and then it's developed, it's varied in a way, and it's repeated here. So these are like the two pillars of a building. There is even balance within a theme. If the theme starts in one key area, it usually works its way back to that key area. Now, as you would expect, the Fifth Symphony of Schubert is very much in this vein. It's very akin to a symphony by Mozart. And indeed, at the time he wrote this symphony, he wrote in his diary on June 13th, "O Mozart, immortal Mozart, what countless impressions of a brighter, better life have you stamped upon our souls." Now, unfortunately, this video is sort of an elevator pitch, and I don't really have time or the means to get into the analytical side of how the symphony actually differs from Mozart. But there are some things that you will hear if you listen to a lot of Mozart that are slightly different. For example, in the first movement, normally when the opening theme is replayed, recapped at the end of the movement, this is what we call the recapitulation, it would be in exactly the same key as the piece started, the home key of the piece. Now Schubert casts his recapitulation in a different key. It's a related one, but it's different all the same. Instead of B flat, it's E flat. Subtle difference. There are also hints at the much more expressive and sometimes brooding style you would hear in a later work of Schubert. So there it is in a nutshell. Again, we look forward to being able to play live for you. In the meantime, if you are tuning in live to this on the 29th, we simulcast this on YouTube and Facebook at the same time. But you can access this through the Symphony's website page. But if you're tuning in on either of those sites, please leave a comment or two in the chat. One of the nice things about presenting performances in this way is that we, the musicians, can interact with you online as well. And many of us will be listening too. So we'll see you virtually on October the 29th at 7:30 p.m.